The Long Game acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is produced. We would also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders listening to this podcast. We would also like to acknowledge that mindfulness is an important and ongoing part of life.
Breathe in, breathe out. When the stakes are high and all eyes are on you, how do you perform to your potential? More than ever, the practice of mindfulness has become a pathway to harnessing potential to drive performance of athletes around the world.
Through the lens of some of Australia's most inspiring athletes and sport professionals, we take a deep dive into the different techniques, tools and life lessons they've learnt along the way.
I'm Ben Robbins, Head of Mental Health and Wellbeing at the St Kilda Football Club.
And I'm Jarryd Roughead. And this is The Long Game, brought to you by AIA Australia. When it comes to Paralympic success, Ellie Cole is in a league of her own. Despite 17 Paralympic medals across her decorated 20-year career, the way she's persevered through the many setbacks and obstacles, both physical and mental, tell another tale to her inspiring story. Ellie had her leg amputated when she was just 3 years old, but found a love and passion in the pool, which blossomed into a beginning of Australia's most successful Paralympian. Despite the gold medals, world titles, and heroics on the world stage, it hasn't all been smooth sailing for Ellie. Her love of the pool was put under strain, as was her drive to bounce back after debilitating injuries and a loss of control in her own preparation and training. But Ellie has emerged as an inspiration to us all, an athlete not hampered by her disability and instead embracing of it, and someone who Ben and I can't help but admire in every sense. And here for this week's guest we have Ellie Cole. Now for those who don't know Ellie is Australia's most decorated female Paralympian with 17 Paralympic medals. They've got 6 gold, 5 silver, 6 bronze. My first question is, where do you keep them all?
A bit all over the place. I occasionally have to do like an inventory to see if they're all still there, because I take some out every now and then for school visits and whatnot, and just have to check that I've brought them all home.
Just count them all before they go to bed. I don't mind that one. So, Ellie, we'll start from the start. Can we please just get a bit of a sense of your childhood and where it all began for you, please?
Yeah, I grew up in Melbourne on the Mornington Peninsula, so I did follow AFL when I was younger, being a Victorian.
Who's your team,
I was
Ellie?
diagnosed with Demons.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Always have been, but my twin sister goes for the Saints. But yeah, I grew up on the Mornington Peninsula, and I was diagnosed with cancer when I was 2 and had my leg subsequently amputated at the age of 3. And then my parents just like literally threw me into a swimming pool for rehabilitation, and I loved the water, and I kind of just kept swimming my whole life, and I'm 30 and I'm still going. So I think I've had a good run.
So sink or swim?
I'm a bit more of a sink girl these days.
Right.
You know, I've hit 30 and the shoulders don't turn over as well as they used to. I need a bit of the WD-40, I think, but or I need to just sit down, which I'm planning on doing at the end of the year. I'm retiring after the Commonwealth Games.
Right. Okay. So back to your early days there. So at 3 years of age, leg amputated. What's your early memories, Ellie, of childhood? What was it like for you with your disability, and then your transition or continuing on to your swimming career there?
I don't really have any memories of being unwell and being sick with cancer. I think my earliest memories come from probably primary school. I was very fortunate to grow up in a very supportive family, and I mentioned before I have a twin sister. And her and I used to just kind of tackle everything in the playground at school like most kids did. And like there were a few things that sure I struggled with, having a leg missing, like especially things when it came around like climbing playground equipment or like playing cricket. I'd always have to find someone else to do my runs for me. But I think it was wonderful. Like the kids that I grew up around in primary school all helped me out. I was never bullied. I was never made to feel any different by those kids. If anything, they like recognized that I had a difference and they protected me. And I look back at my primary school years and I was very lucky to have the understanding of those children back then. And it probably wasn't until I was a little bit older and I came across quite a few adults who I guess had some pretty deep stigmas that laid within them about what it means to have a disability, that I realized that my difference might not have been all rainbows and unicorns like I thought it was when I was younger. But yeah, I had a pretty good childhood down in Melbourne.
So it wasn't the kids so much that you received sort of different treatment from, it was more some of the adults in your life as you got a bit older. The kids that you hung out with were actually protective of you and cared for you.
Yeah. And I think it's because, you know, when you start primary school, you're 5 years old. And the kids that I grew up with at primary school, we all started at the same time in prep. And so they were exposed to my disability at a very young age, from the age of 5. And as kids do, they asked a few questions and I answered them, and then they just got on with their games and, you know, what they were doing at lunchtime, playing Foursquare or whatever it was. And that was end of story. But yeah, it's kind of when I came across adults that really started to treat me a bit differently. I think that, I don't know, they must have had some preconceived ideas of what I was or wasn't capable of and didn't really let me test that out on my own. And I think that's where I found a bit of a safe haven in a swimming pool, was because I could take my prosthetic leg off, and from looking above the pool, nobody knew that I was any different. And I was always just treated the same as everybody else in my squad by adults, and I really loved that.
So how was the transition into swimming? When did you start, swimming competitively? Did you love swimming immediately? What was it like for you?
Well, I think most kids that grew up around the beach learn how to swim. And so that's the process that I went through. I did my learn to swim with the Kings Learn to Swim in Mornington, on the Mornington Peninsula. And I graduated from there. And I remember Mum sitting me down in the living room and saying, you've got to figure out what you want to do with sports and extracurricular activities. And I just come back from seeing Swan Lake, and so I really wanted to be a ballerina. And she kind of looked at me a bit like, oh, I don't think that's a good idea. How about you try swimming squads? And so I went to the pool and tried squads. And the first coach that I ever had, Russell Parsons, was a big Demon supporter. This is where the Demons come in. And I was a big D's supporter as well. And so he treated me like royalty at that swimming session. And he kind of threw all the Collingwood players in the end lane and didn't pay them much attention. And I don't know, I just got a lot of attention from him, and it was a lot of positive attention from the very first session. And I loved the environment, and I just kept coming back for more.
So you had a really positive role model early in life, and this helped to motivate you, encourage you to pursue this sport of swimming.
I started competing probably at about 10 years old with my swimming club. My first ever competition was the state championships at MSAC, and I lost. I thought I was going to win going in. I remember my twin sister telling me that she was going to polish my medal on the way home. And I dived in and my goggles fell off and I came last.
Oh, wow.
And it was devastating for me. But I look back on that race with a big smile on my face, because I think between that age, at 10 and 30, I think my goggles have only fallen off like twice since then. So I've done pretty well. I've learned my lessons.
So it's happened pretty quick for you then, because at 10 years old, you're entering in your first competition, and 6 years later, you're preparing for your first Paralympics.
Yeah, that was really quick.
So how does this...
Well, swimming's quite a young sport. You know, the athletes in swimming develop from a very young age, kind of like gymnastics, particularly the girls. I think our power to weight ratio is quite good at a young age, and our flexibility is very good. And for swimming, you need a lot of flexibility. You need a lot of that, you know how kids can just go, and they never seem to get tired. You need a lot of that to be a great swimmer. And so you find there's been quite a number of swimmers on our Australian swim team who have made their first team at 14, 15. And it's not uncommon to see 14 and 15-year-olds on our Australian swim team. It's very uncommon to see 30-year-olds. So I'm still surprised that I'm still around. But it all happened very young. 16 years old was my first games in Beijing.
What do you attribute your longevity in the sport to, Ellie?
That's a great question, because over my 16-year career, I probably haven't necessarily enjoyed my sport like I'd hoped, probably for about 13 of those years.
13 out of
Wow.
16.
Yeah, 13 out of 16 years, I haven't necessarily enjoyed my sport as much as I'd hoped to. I feel like in swimming, I don't really know how to put this, but you kind of turn into this athlete robot where you just do what you're told, and you think that it's making you happy, and it's not, probably until you're a little bit older where you realize that you didn't have as much choice in how you trained or where you took your breaks, what competitions you went to as you'd like. And I think I've enjoyed it probably more since probably the last 2 years of my career than I ever have, because I think I've taken a lot more ownership of my program than I have previously. But yeah, it's certainly been an interesting journey. I've taken a step back when I need to. I've taken a lot of breaks through injury. I've had 2 shoulder reconstructions and a broken foot and a broken hip, and a lot of other things go wrong. And so, yeah, I've taken some time out of the water and in the water. It's usually mostly due to injury, but every time I've come back from injury, I've done something that I haven't done before. So, for example, after I got back in after my shoulder reconstructions, I broke my first world record. And so I'm kind of like, well, I like the challenge, I think, of being injured, overcoming that injury, and then seeing what I can do after. Yeah. I think that's what's made me come back for more, but I'm not entirely sure what I can put it down to.
So you talk there about the greater autonomy you've had in the last couple of years over your own career, whereas earlier, what was happening? The coach was telling you, this is what you need to do, this is where you need to compete, this is how you need to train, and you just were following along. Is that right? And yeah, there's been a bit of a change there.
Because you're such a young, like I mentioned before, because athletes are so young when they enter the sport of swimming, they put a lot of faith in their coaches and their support staff, because they don't have the knowledge there or the life experience really to make their own decisions. And so I think that's what a lot of it came down to, is that I just didn't have that life experience there. But, after I went to maybe 2 or 3 Paralympics, I could see, some red flags in coaching or things that I didn't like about the way my program was being run, particularly, living at the AIS in Canberra or in the USC program up at Sunshine Coast. Those big high performance Swimming Australia centres, I think, can be quite toxic to an athlete's freedom, because there's a lot of money being invested into those centres from Swimming Australia, and those coaches and support staff feel a lot of pressure to deliver great results from the athletes that are in those programs. And so I feel like that mentality of win at all costs really shines through in those highly funded sports programs. And I stepped away from the Swimming Australia programs in 2018 and just joined some swimming clubs that weren't funded by Swimming Australia. And I've had the best relationships with my coaches since then, because I feel like they have more of an angle of the well-being space that we're really finding shining through sport lately. And for me, I'm a much happier athlete, and I'm performing just as well as I was beforehand. So to be able to see that difference between being in a highly funded program versus kind of doing it on your own has been really interesting in swimming. But those decisions to kind of run your own program and work with a coach so closely, I think, can only really come from experienced athletes as well. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword there, I think.
Yep. What type of things do you see different, or have you done different in between those 2 programs? So is there certain things that you have, grabbed a bull by the horns and just said, I'm going about this my way, I'm investing in this? What type of different, I suppose, methods have you gone about making yourself better?
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, like finding the right coach is important. In a funded program, you just are allocated a coach and that's it. And sometimes your personalities might be very different, or you might have a very different idea of what success actually is. I find that the coaches that I'm working with now, I've selected them myself, and I've selected them because I've seen something in them that I really enjoy. Like the coach that I currently have, he's also a chiropractor, but he is so committed and so passionate about what he's doing that you can't help but like wanting to be involved in a program like that. But I find that when you have that better relationship with your coach, and what I've seen that's different that I enjoy around the wellbeing space is just understanding that athletes need that work-life balance, that their life can't be 98% sport and 2% everything else, because when I was getting injured, I didn't have anything to fall back on. I see myself as anything else other than a swimmer, and I really struggled through those times. But, you know, allocating the time to study and to work and to spend time with friends, and my whole family live in Melbourne and I live in Sydney, you know, a few days out of the year flying down to Melbourne and visiting them, instead of just having to be at every single training session of the year, I think is really important. Like, I probably only miss maybe 1% of my training sessions, but, you know, I know that in the back of my pocket, if there's something that's urgent in my personal life that needs attention, that I'm able to take that now. And that has been a world of difference for me.
Ellie, you've touched on those really serious injuries you've experienced throughout your career. How did you work through those moments? How did you get through that adversity? I imagine it would have been pretty easy to say, you know, this is a bit much, this is pretty hard here, and just throw in the towel. You haven't. You persisted. Can you reflect a little bit on that process for us?
I've had, like I mentioned before, a lot of injuries. I spent, before the London Paralympics, I think 2 years with labral tears and swimming 10, 15 kilometres a day on labral tears.
Not helpful.
Yeah, so it's not only like the end result that's painful, but also the years where those injuries are starting to affect your training that's really hard mentally to get through. I don't think there's ever really been a time when I've been injured where I've just wanted to throw the towel in. I didn't really see that as an option, and I'm not really sure why. I think being a Paralympian and being around so many other para-athletes who have become Paralympians because of injury or because of an accident or illness, from a really young age, we're almost forced to always find an alternative way to train or an alternative way to, get ourselves through an injury period. And so for me, being injured, I really enjoy the creativity. You know, trying to train with 2 broken shoulders with one leg was actually a lot of fun for me. Because
it's very hard to swim, I assume.
It was. And so I had to decrease my training load. Instead of swimming 50, 60 kilometres a week, I had to drop that to about 10 kilometres, and I had to start doing more Pilates, and I was focusing a lot of my attention on, you know, physio exercises. I was doing like an hour and a half of physio exercises a day. And then I went to the World Championships that year and broke my first world record. And so for me, I guess seeing the way a training program can be developed to suit somebody and each athlete in such a unique way is a real challenge for me, and I really enjoy that challenge. And so in our COVID lockdown, I had a broken hip with our first lockdown. And I was also trying to train for Tokyo without a swimming pool, just in lockdown in my apartment. And I think I was the only athlete that was just...
Fill the bathtub up.
I was loving it. I was like having the best time with my broken hip in my apartment, because I had to train for a sport that required water without any water at all.
That requires some creativity.
It really did. And it was the best experience. So now I look back on my swimming career and I was like, why have I swam hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers? I'm a huge believer in the philosophy of training smarter, not harder, but I still managed to push myself pretty hard at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So listening to you there, your disability has helped you take perspective that maybe other athletes, it's much harder for them to do especially when they're injured, because you've gone through this, you've worked through this throughout your life. You can see things, take a positive almost out of what's a very tough situation there, you know, those injuries you describe. Is that reasonable? Yeah,
that's certainly reasonable. I think I think when you focus around disabilities or any kind of limitation or adversity, you can actually create quite a fair bit of innovation and progress like a particular field quite quickly. And I saw that with my shoulder injuries, that, you know, engaging different professionals and completely changing a swimming program to how, so you've got to understand, in Australia, swimmers have always swam hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers for sprint events. And I'm always coming across athletics sprinters saying, why do you guys train the way you do? And I can't answer the question because I've studied at university. I know that all of the textbooks say that you shouldn't train that way for sprint events. And I finally got to test that because of my shoulder reconstructions and found that it is true. We should probably be training completely differently as sprinters as how we currently do in our swimming day and age that we're in. And for me, I saw that as an athlete, but it's really difficult to relay that information and for a coach to put trust in something that they've never done before. And so you can actually see a fair bit of innovation when you look at ways that things can't be done, but then trying to find other ways to do them. And, you know, even at the moment, NASA are planning on sending a whole team of blind astronauts into space, because if they can find solutions to every single problem that comes around losing your vision in space, then that's going to protect the athletes that do have their vision in case something does go wrong. It's like the quickest way of finding solutions. And so it's quite, you know, I think you just have to have that mindset whenever you're facing a challenge, is that you're going to learn way more from that challenge than you ever will just sitting in your everyday comfortable life. And I think that's why you hear the terms like pushing the limits so often, and why we see it in sport so often is because, you know, you hit a wall, you've got to find a way around it, and you learn so much from that experience.
You know, you've overcome a lot in your life, and you've performed to a really high level for a consistently performed at a really high level for a long time, as your medal tally indicates. What advice would you give to anyone listening about so those two concepts of working your way through adversity, and then part two, how do you perform consistently at the highest level?
That's a great question. And I think your answer was almost in the question. Okay. You know, how do you perform consistently? Like, that's all it is. It's just being consistent with what you're doing.
So how do you do that?
Well, you've just got to keep going.
Keep going. Yeah.
So for me, like what I've noticed with swimmers and other athletes is that burnout can happen very quickly because expectations are so high, not from just themselves, but from everybody else. And the only way people feel like they can meet that expectation and quickly is to just go 110% all of the time. I feel like an athlete's career could span 20, 30 years if they just go at 100% or 90% of the time. You'll actually find that if you go at 90% of the time over like a 10 or 15 year period, you're probably going to do a lot better off than if you went 110% of the time for only 8 years and burn out and hated the sport and never wanted to come back again. So for me, I'm a huge believer in that consistency over intensity. And that's when it becomes really important to include those other factors in your life, such as, you know, education and relationships, and making sure that you're taking time for yourself, because burnout is a huge thing that I see within swimmers. A lot of swimmers only go to one Olympics, or maybe two if they're lucky. You don't see very many going to 3, 4. Kate Campbell's even pushing for a 5th Olympics, which has never been done before on the swim team. And the thing about all of those athletes that go to 4 or 5, or even 3 or 4 Olympics, is that at times they've taken a complete year off the sport if they need to, or they've taken 6 months out if they need to. They take a step back knowing that if they don't, that they are going to burn out, and that's when I think the longevity is affected.
Righto, so you're on the blocks in your Olympic final, you know, and you guys,
there's been a few. So
there's been a lot.
Well, you can actually talk through here the differences maybe between the question I'm going to ask, but you know, for us in our sport, our players go out every week. we might win, lose or draw. We get to follow up the week after and the week after that and the week after that, 22 weeks. For you guys in the sport, you're trying to achieve great things in once every 4 years. And she's over pretty quick, that race. I'm really interested in how you prepare and frame it up when you're on the blocks. What's in your mind? How do you work through, any of the anxieties or doubts or fears that you might have? Thinking, shit, this is 4 years about to go into this, 30 seconds or a couple of minutes.
I think it's all depending on the individual. Like some athletes work really well with telling themselves, this is my one chance every 4 years. Whereas for me personally, that is a very anxiety provoking thought. And that is not a thought that I want to be having right before I'm going onto the blocks. And also I feel like my approach to the block has changed as I've become more experienced. When I was young, heading into the London Games, I was chasing my very first gold medal. I was always chasing another athlete named Natalie Detroit. She was the one that I wanted to beat. And I was always the underdog. And then I beat her at the London Games. And it probably wasn't until the Rio Games where I had my first experience of just overwhelming anxiety, because I wasn't hunting anymore. I was being hunted for the first time in my career. And I didn't enjoy that feeling at all. And so I feel like that lead up certainly changes depending on where I am in my career. Now that I have won 17 medals, I kind of don't need that validation anymore, if that makes sense. Like, I know that I'm a pretty good swimmer, and I've actually, when I race now, I don't even think about anybody else that's next to me. Like, I don't really care about them, to be honest. My idea of having a great race doesn't come down to medals at all anymore. It actually comes down to executing everything in my race perfectly. So at the moment, I'm training for the 100 meters freestyle. For me to be able to do that well, I need to get the start right. I need to get the turn right, which I usually stuff up. And then I also need to pace myself well enough so that last 15 meters, I can keep my stroke rate, but also keep the rotation in my technique. And so if I put all of those well together, then my time's going to be great. And if my time's going to be great, the medals usually come as well. But I've only swum a perfect race probably twice in my swimming career. And so that's kind of what I'm chasing now. Like, my focus isn't even on the medals. It's just about doing everything right. And so now when I go to the blocks, I'm not thinking about this is my only chance, because it's not my only chance. I've got plenty of competitions throughout the year to try it. This is just another chance for me. And it's very different. Although it's a bit hard to think that way when you have like 15,000 people screaming at you.
Yeah, it's pretty easy while we're...
I think that's probably the only difference between being an everyday competition and the Paralympics for me.
It's pretty easy to sit here and talk about these things in the abstract, isn't it? When you're on the blocks and you got the eyes of the world on you, it's a completely different thing. I love what you talk about there, like your mind could easily fast forward to the gold medal, winning the race. Instead, you're keeping your attention on my stroke rate, my turn, my start, like the process, not the outcome, which is something that,
that's a huge part of the sports psychology these days, I think, is the process, not the outcome. And you'll find a lot of athletes, not just in footy or swimming, always talking about the process these days, because it's so easy to get carried away with thinking about the result. And it honestly does carry you away. You just completely stop thinking about what you're doing in the current moment. And then, because we're human beings, the thoughts come in of what happens if I don't win. And I feel like we think a lot more of those negative thoughts than we do of those self-belief thoughts. And that's what can derail a lot of people at the Olympics. And that's why I love the Olympics, because everyone there has pushed the human body to 100%. Genetics play a small part, but you see some huge differences in results, and they usually come down to how people cope with the pressure mentally. And that's what sets people apart at such a high level like that. And I really enjoy watching the mental side of the Olympics, as well as like a AFL grand final. You see the athletes walking out and the players walking out, and you can just tell who's holding it together and who isn't.
Agree.
I 100% agree. We're talking 4 years for a race, which is only a minute long. If that. Now, I know it's a lot quicker than a minute, but like 1 minute. 4 years. Like, this is just, it's wrong.
I couldn't see. That's the thing, though. I couldn't imagine playing like anything over 10 minutes. I'd be like, that's too long. There's too many mistakes that could happen there, and it's exhausting.
Fitness coaches have told me that
I'm happy with
enough.
it to be over and done with in a minute. Thank you very much.
Yes. Well,
So, Ellie, what's next then for you? Where does your attention turn, and what are you working on at the moment?
because as you said, we've got you're down to your final race in this next Commonwealth Games, and then it's goggles go in the bin or on the hook, and we're done.
Yeah, well, I think you guys are probably almost hearing it first, but Commonwealth Games actually isn't my final event.
Oh no!
I was going to.
Oh no!
I was going to retire at the Commonwealth Games, but I got a call out from Swimming Australia to compete at the duel in the pool after the Commonwealth Games. It's something like 9 days later. And I used to watch duel in the pool as a little kid. I remember watching Libby Lenton back then, her name was Libby Lenton, racing Michael Phelps. And I thought that was just the coolest thing I've ever seen in the world. And so it's the first time that para-athletes have been invited to a duel in the pool. And so I thought, it's like my childhood dream to race in this competition. Why not stick around for another 9 days?
Right.
Yeah.
9 days.
So,
you can do that,
only
can't
been
you?
14 years, 15, 20 years of swimming. 9 days, what's it going to matter?
Exactly. It's like a little drop in the ocean. So I probably will be, in terms of my serious competitive career, retiring at the Commonwealth Games. Duel in the pool is just a bit more fun than anything. Yeah. I think there's like fireworks and fairy floss and whatnot.
Is there anyone there that you just really want to take on too?
Well, who wouldn't want to take on Caleb Dressel?
Yeah, true.
Or Katie Ledecky. Any of the Americans, really, because I spent a lot of time with the Australian swim team, but I've never seen any of the US Olympians in the flesh.
Yeah, right.
So I'm going to be there actually as the world's biggest fangirl, but also wearing my own cap and goggles, having to do my own thing as well.
Nothing wrong with that. For those who would like to follow you too, Ellie, where else can we find you on socials and whatnot?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I use Instagram quite a lot at Ellie Cole Swim. I don't really use Facebook. I don't have, actually, I think I have TikTok. Don't really know how to use it.
Prolific user, yeah. Yeah.
And I did have Snapchat at one stage, but I don't know how to reply to people, and I was sick of people sending me like random photos of their faces, and so I deleted that very quickly. Yeah. Not the most tech savvy, but yeah, mostly on Instagram.
Oh, well, brilliant. So for those out there, follow Ellie. We want to thank you very much from Ben and I at the long game for joining us, and wish you all the best for what's to come, but also after swimming as well.
Cheers. Thank you. It's
Good
nice
on
to
you,
speak
Ellie.
to you boys.
Fantastic.
Go Saints.
So Ellie, pretty bloody inspiring individual there, Jarryd. I get a bit sooky when my kids don't pack the dishwasher properly.
Yeah.
Whereas she just has...
She has no water and still manages to train.
Some pretty bloody large obstacles in her life. Your takeaways there?
The fact that she's been able to go so long, 13 years, while having broken shoulders, broken hips, I think she mentioned a broken foot as well. In a sense, that was her break from swimming. Now, you don't wish that upon anyone to have to go through that amount of injuries, but I think that's what's been able to keep her in good stead too. The perspective of going through injuries, fighting to get through the injuries, and then still performing at the best of her, top of her game, really. That was what I took out of it. What about yourself? Yeah,
well, I mean, it's the perspective, the ability to take perspective even through, when we're most challenged in life. That's a skill. And for some of us, it comes more easily than others. But for Ellie, I think definitely her history would have shaped that. But she sounds like she's got just an unbelievable ability to be able to either find the positive or get back on task when things aren't working out as you would like. And then just purely from a performance perspective, when you stand on the blocks there, as we discussed, for our guys, every week's a new challenge, every week's a new opportunity. We get beaten one week, we get another crack at it the next. They don't have that, the swimmers, and so just your mental strength or the ability to keep your attention on the process. My start, now my turn, now my stroke, and just there rather than thinking about standing on the podium with the gold medal around your neck. Unbelievably difficult, very easy to talk about. It's much harder to do in practice.
Also helps that you just keep filling the medal cabinet up.
Yeah, when you keep winning,
17 from 4 is not bad.
Also pretty good for
coming
your
home,
confidence.
I'll leave and then I'll come back with 4 medals probably each time I go.
Yeah.
So that's not a bad way. To
Yeah,
look at
well,
it
gives you a nice little bit of confidence. Also, liked she spoke about the balance, trying to strike the right balance between, whether in her case a sporting career, but regardless of what you're doing, what I'm doing in life, you're getting the balance right between, okay, here's my profession, here's my family, here's my study, rather than all here.
Yeah.
Which I think there's, obviously a great lesson for all of us in that.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed the latest step of The Long Game, don't forget to subscribe, leave a kind review, and tell all your friends.
And remember, breathe in and breathe out.